Aliana was forced to marry a millionaire in a coma instead of her sister. What happened next shocked everyone. But before we continue, write in the comments which city you are watching this video from. Enjoy the video. Aliana stood by the window of her room in an old house on the outskirts of Moscow, looking at the gray sky. The wind drove fallen leaves across the courtyard, and a storm raged in her soul. Today, she had to do something she had never dreamed of: marry a man she barely knew. Maxim Volkov, heir to one of Russia's largest construction empires, lay in a coma after a terrible accident. Initially, the groom was not her, but her older sister, Veronica. Veronica had always been the perfect daughter in the Kuznetsov family, tall, with sharp features, and long blonde hair. She was used to admiring glances from childhood. Aliana, the younger sister, with dark curls and a quiet demeanor, remained in the shadows. Their father, Mikhail Kuznetsov, once owned a small construction firm, but after the crisis, the business went downhill. Salvation came from the wealthy and influential Volkov family, whose support could save the Kuznetsovs from debt. The condition of the deal was the marriage of Veronica to Maxim. But when Maxim had an accident and fell into a coma, Veronica refused. "I will not be the wife of an invalid," she coldly declared at dinner, throwing her fork onto the table. "This is not my life." Her mother, Elena Nikolaevna, cried, and her father turned red with anger, but Veronica remained unyielding. Then Mikhail's gaze fell on Aliana. "You will do this," he said, not asking but stating. "For our family." Aliana wanted to object, but the words stuck in her throat. She knew their old but cozy home was already mortgaged to the bank. And without the Volkovs' money, they would lose everything. And now she stood before the mirror, trying on a strict gray suit instead of a wedding dress, trying to understand how her life had changed so abruptly. The wedding took place in the cramped living room of the Kuznetsovs' country house. Maxim, of course, was not there. He lay in the hospital surrounded by machines. Instead, a notary drily read out the terms of the marriage contract. Aliana signed the papers with a trembling hand, feeling the burning gazes of her relatives on her back. She became Aliana Volkov, the wife of a man who did not even know her name. The Volkovs' mansion in the elite settlement of Rubliovka was huge and cold. High ceilings, marble floors, paintings in gilded frames, everything here screamed of wealth, but there was no warmth. Aliana entered the house with a small suitcase, feeling like an unwelcome guest. The silent maid Tamara, a woman in her 50s, led her to Maxim's room. He lay on a hospital bed surrounded by medical equipment, his hair falling on his pale forehead, his eyes closed, and a machine supporting his breath. "You are now the mistress," Tamara said dryly, leaving her alone. Aliana stood in the spacious living room, clutching the handles of her suitcase. The marble floor gleamed, reflecting the light of the crystal chandelier, but the warmth in this house was only superficial. She did not feel like the mistress. How could she? She was brought here not out of love or choice, but as a link in the chain binding two families. That evening, Margarita, Maxim's mother, approached her. Tall, with a straight posture and a stern gaze, she seemed carved from stone. "We are grateful that you agreed to this marriage," she said, her voice as steady as an accountant's report. "The deal with your father saves our business. And you have ensured our peace of mind. But do not think this makes you one of us. You are here only because it is necessary." Aliana nodded, swallowing the bitter lump in her throat. She understood that for the Volkovs, she was just a signature on a document, a guarantee that their empire would not suffer while Maxim lay in a coma. Margarita's gratitude was as cold as the winter wind outside, leaving no room for illusions. But inside Aliana, a spark of determination ignited. They saw her as a tool, but she would prove she could be more than that. The next day, Aliana began taking care of Maxim. She did not know why she was doing it, perhaps to prove to herself that she was not just a signature on paper. She brought simple chrysanthemums from the nearest market to his room and read him books she found in the mansion's library. At first, It was detective stories, then poems by Yeznin. It seemed to her that his breathing deepened when she read about the Golden Groove and the autumn wind. The staff whispered behind her back. Some said she was pretending to gain the Volkovs' trust, others thought she was crazy. But Alyona paid no attention. She wiped the dust from his bedside table, straightened his blanket, and ensured the nurse performed the procedures on time. This became her small world in the vast, unfamiliar house. One day Tamara, bringing her tea, said quietly, "You are not what they thought. It seems you truly have a kind heart." Alyona smiled for the first time in a long time, feeling warmth. Gradually the whispers in the house subsided, and even Margarita stopped looking at her with disdain. One day, while cleaning Maxim's office, Alyona found a folder hidden behind a stack of books. Inside were documents about the accident, a police report, photos of the Mercedes, and hospital discharge papers. As she read, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. The brakes had been tampered with. It was no accident. Someone had cut the brake lines. It was an attempted murder. Alyona froze, holding the papers in her hands. Someone wanted Maxim dead. And that someone might still be in this house. She looked at her husband lying in the next room, and for the first time felt not just pity, but responsibility. She had to protect him, even if he never knew about it. 3 months passed, and winter covered Rublyovka with snow. Maxim's room became a little warmer from Alyona's care. One day, as she read Anna Karenina to him, she noticed his fingers twitch. At first, she thought she was imagining it, but the movement repeated. Her heart raced as she called the doctor, who confirmed Maxim is improving. "It's a miracle," said the elderly doctor with kind eyes. "He is responding to stimuli. He might wake up soon." Alyona could not hold back her tears. She did not know whether to rejoice or be afraid. And then Veronica called. Alyona stood by Maxim's bed straightening his blanket when the silence was broken by a ringtone. She picked up the phone and heard her sister's cold voice, as chilling as the winter wind outside. "I heard he's coming back to life," Veronica said, her tone laced with mockery. "Congratulations, Alyona. But don't think this will last. He was mine, and I will take him back." Alyona clenched the phone, but before she could respond, the call ended. A week later, Veronica appeared at the mansion. She entered like a queen, in a long coat, and with perfect makeup, as if the scene had been prepared for her triumph. Alyona looked up from the book she was reading to Maxim, and met her sister's disdainful gaze. "Do you really think he will choose you?" Veronica asked, crossing her arms. Her lips curled into a smirk, but there was a flash of anger in her eyes. She turned and left, leaving a trail of expensive perfume. Alyona watched her go, feeling her sister's words cutting deep. She looked down at Maxim's pale face and whispered, "I will not give up. Not to her, not to anyone." In December, as snowflakes fell heavily covering the ground with a white shroud, Maxim's eyelids fluttered, and he opened his eyes. They were gray and confused. He looked at her but did not recognize her. "Who are you?" he asked hoarsely. Alyona froze. The doctors later explained it was retrograde amnesia. He did not remember the last few years of his life, including the accident and their wedding. For him, Alyona was a stranger. That same day, Veronica arrived. She rushed into the room, embraced Maxim, and cried dramatically. "I was so worried about you," she sobbed, stroking his hand. "I was always by your side." Maxim looked at her with regret, but did not push her away. It seemed as if the Volkov family was celebrating Maxim's return to life. Margarita hugged her son, and relatives raised their glasses in a toast. Alyona stood in the corner, feeling invisible and unnecessary. "You have fulfilled your role," Margarita told her later. "You can leave now. You are his wife only on paper. He does not know you. And Veronica, she is his past and true love." Alyona returned to Maxim's room, where Veronica was already sitting beside him, telling him about their trips to Sochi. Maxim listened, trying to remember, and Alyona felt like an outsider. But she did not give up. She continued to help Maxim recover, bringing him tea with raspberries, reading newspapers, and reminding him of things he used to love: cars, skiing, and music by Chopin. Gradually, he began to ask questions. "Why do you care for me so much?" he asked one day, looking at her intently. "Because I promised," she replied simply. Veronica grew impatient. She saw Maxim drawn to Alyona and was infuriated. Alyona understood she needed to find evidence to protect her husband and herself. She returned to the documents about the accident. With a heavy heart, sensing that the truth hidden in these yellowed pages would change her life, she sifted through them with trembling hands. Among the chaos of receipts and reports, her eyes caught a record of a transfer of 100 rubles to some rundown garage in Lyubertsy. The amount seemed too round, too suspicious. Alyona clutched the paper, feeling a chill run down her spine. This was the key. She took the keys to an old Lada borrowed from Tamara's friend, who always helped in tough times. The car creaked and rattled as she drove through the gray veil of a suburban morning toward the garage. The journey was long and endless, as if time itself stretched to delay the moment of truth. When she finally arrived, she found a dilapidated hangar. Inside, it smelled of gasoline and metal, and from the depths came the clang of tools. The mechanic, a stocky man with greasy hands and a weary gaze, met her with suspicion. His face, covered in stubble and oil stains, expressed nothing but irritation. Alyona tried to speak, but he waved her off. Then, gathering her resolve, she slammed the transfer record onto the dirty workbench. The man froze. His eyes darted, and then he crumbled. "A blonde woman hired me," he confessed, looking away. "Expensive, all dressed up in a fur coat and heels. She told me to cut the brakes to make the accident look like a coincidence. I didn't ask why. Money is money." Alyona felt the ground shift beneath her. Before her eyes, the image of Veronica appeared, cold, haughty, with her perfect hair and eternal disdainful smile. It was her, there was no doubt. Evening found Alyona at the Volkovs' mansion. Snow fell in heavy flakes, covering the earth with a white shroud. In the garden, among the bare trees, stood Veronica in her white coat, looking like a ghost woven from the winter night. Alyona approached her, clenching her fists until her nails dug into her palms. The air between them crackled with tension. "It was you," Alyona said, her voice trembling but firm. "You tried to kill him." Veronica did not even blink. Her cold eyes met Alyona's gaze without a trace of remorse. "And what if I did?" she replied with a dismissive smirk. "Maxim became a burden. I agreed to the marriage for the Volkovs' money, not to take care of a vegetable for the rest of my life. The coma gave me time to find a way out of this trap, to keep their support and get rid of him. If he had died, I would have been a wealthy widow with a claim to part of his fortune. If he survived but was useless, I could have left him to rot in that room. You shouldn't have interfered. This was my game." "You're a monster," Alyona whispered, breathless with horror. Veronica laughed a cold, empty laugh and walked away, leaving Alyona alone in the snow. Alyona realized Veronica wanted freedom and power. Maxim's death would have made her a rich widow, still connected to the Volkovs but free from obligations. The coma was the perfect interval. She could play the grieving fiancé without breaking the engagement and losing the benefits. It was a cold and ruthless calculation. Just like Veronica herself. Days passed, and Maxim began to remember. His mind, clouded by the accident, slowly cleared. One night, he woke up in a panic from a vivid nightmare. A woman with a cold smile stood by his car, holding something sharp. He told Alyona about it, and her heart ached with resolve. She knew it was time to reveal the truth. They gathered the family in the spacious living room of the mansion. The fire in the fireplace cast shadows on the walls, but the warmth could not thaw the icy tension in the room. Maxim, still weak, rose from his chair. His voice, though quiet, was steady. He pointed at Veronica and said, "It was you. You wanted me dead." Veronica paled but quickly regained her composure, speaking rapidly and defensively. But the facts Eliana had gathered were irrefutable. Fragments of Maxim's memories aligned with the grim picture. Margarita, Maxim's mother, sat motionless, her face pale as death. Then she rose slowly with dignity and pointed to the door. "Leave," she said in a low but firm voice. "You are no longer part of this family." Veronica stood in the middle of the living room, her tall, proud figure seeming like the last bastion of her unyielding confidence. But as Maxim's words hung in the air, her mask cracked. She looked around with a fierce gaze, her eyes filled with cold fury, searching for any hint of support or forgiveness. But the room was silent as a tomb, and no one dared to meet her eyes. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to say something, to justify herself or hurl a final insult, but instead, she turned and walked away. The sound of her heels echoed through the hallway like a drumroll before an execution. The door slammed behind her with such force that the windows rattled. The echo of that slam hung in the air like the final chord of her presence in the house. A heavy silence fell over the room, not just an absence of sound, but a profound, almost tangible stillness, as if time itself had paused to catch its breath after the storm. Maxim, still weak, his face pale as the first snow, turned slowly to Eliana. His movements were cautious, as if afraid that this fragile moment would shatter with a sudden move. His eyes, which had been empty and frightening in the hospital room, now held a faint, warm light, like a ray of sunshine breaking through winter clouds. He looked at her, and in that gaze was a mix of surprise, gratitude, and a tentative admission that she had become his anchor in a sea of chaos. "I did not know you before," he said, his voice hoarse and quiet, almost a whisper. "Nothing. Neither your face nor your voice. But now I see you did not just stand by my side. You pulled me out of the darkness. You saved me." Eliana felt something within her break open. The dam she had been holding back for so long crumbled under the weight of her emotions. Tears, hot and salty, streamed down her cheeks, but she did not try to hide them. In that moment, her vulnerability became her strength. Maxim reached out slowly, his still weak fingers touching her hand, and he held it gently but firmly, a promise of a new beginning. For the first time in months, the mansion felt lighter. The air, once heavy with pain and secrets, was cleansed, and the shadow of the past that had hung over them dissipated, fading in the soft glow of the fireplace. Maxim recovered day by day, and with each step, each word, Eliana saw him returning not just to the life he had before the accident, but to a new life where she had found her place. One evening, as the snow outside turned to rain, he invited her to the garden. His voice was firmer than before, but still held a note of nervousness. Under an old oak tree, its branches heavy with the weight of the past winter, he knelt down. In his hands, he held not a ring but a simple willow branch he had plucked on the way. But for Eliana, it was more precious than any diamond. "I cannot offer you a deal like before," he said, looking into her eyes. "And I do not want anyone to pressure us. This is just my heart speaking. It asks you to stay with me. Not for the family, not for duty. For us. Will you marry me again?" Her throat tightened with tears, but this time they were tears of joy, pure and clear as a spring stream. She nodded, unable to speak, and fell into his embrace, feeling his warmth envelop her like a long-awaited dream after an endless night. The second wedding took place in a small church on the outskirts of Moscow, far from the glamour and bustle of Rubliovka. The stone walls, darkened by time, held the warmth of countless prayers, and the ringing of the bells, pure and high, echoed over the fields, mixing with the first songs of the birds. The sun cast colorful rays through the stained glass windows, painting the wooden pews with a rainbow of light, and in that light Eliana seemed like an angel descended to earth. Maxim stood beside her, still thin but with a straight back, and his gaze, filled with love, said more than any words could express. The Volkov family, for the first time in a long time, gathered not for gain or duty, but for genuine joy. Even Margarita, whose sternness had always been an impenetrable wall, had changed that day. After the ceremony, she approached Eliana, her steps slow and almost uncertain, her eyes, usually cold, shining with tears. She took Eliana's hands, her fingers trembling, and her voice, always steady as steel, faltered into a whisper. "Forgive me, child. I looked down on you, saw you as an outsider, a tool for our purposes. I was wrong, terribly wrong. You did not just save my son. You brought our family back. Thank you." Aliana embraced her, feeling the last barriers between them crumble. It was a forgiveness, genuine and deep, and in that moment, she knew she had finally found her place among the Volkos. That night, as the spring sky was filled with stars, Aliana stood beside Maxim on a hill behind the church. The wind rustled her hair, carrying the scent of blooming grass. She looked into his deep, loving eyes and felt her heart beat steadily and calmly for the first time in a long time. His hand, warm and reliable, held hers, and in that touch was a promise, faith, and a future. She remembered the fire of betrayal, the cold gaze of Veronica, the loneliness in the vast mansion, and the pain of being an outsider. But she understood that all of it was a trial, a love forged in the crucible of hardship and tempered against storms, stronger than anything in the world. "We won," she whispered, and her voice dissolved into the night's silence. Maxim smiled, pulled her closer, and kissed her tenderly but with a strength that could melt any ice. Under the stars, in each other's arms, they knew their story was just beginning.